stood in the center of the massive courtroom. Her hands were locked in metal cuffs that glowed with blue energy. Around her, hundreds of alien beings sat in tall seats that reached up toward the domed ceiling. Their eyes watched her with cold interest. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had scales that changed color as they moved. A few looked almost human, but their skin was too pale and their eyes too large. She had seen this room before, but never as the one being judged. 3 months ago, she had walked through these same doors as captain of the human defense fleet. Today, she was just a criminal waiting for her punishment. The lead judge was unnamed. His species looked like tall, thin humans, but their skin was silver and their eyes were completely black. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber without any warmth. "Of Earth," he said, "you have broken the most important law in our galaxy. The prime directive of non-interference exists to protect all species from the chaos that comes when advanced knowledge is shared too quickly." Kept her chin up. She would not show fear, even though her heart was beating fast. "I saved lives," she said. "An entire civilization was about to die from a disease they could not cure. I gave them the medicine they needed to survive." "You gave them human medicine," said another judge. This one was from the Crystalline Collective. Her body looked like living glass that reflected the courtroom lights. "You changed their natural development path. You made them dependent on outside help." "I made sure they would have a future," replied. "What good is natural development if they all die before they can achieve it?" Murmurs spread through the watching crowd. Some aliens nodded their heads in what might have been agreement. Others made sounds that knew were signs of anger or disgust. Raised one long, silver hand. The room fell silent. "This is exactly why humans are dangerous," he said. "You act with emotion instead of logic. You think only about the present moment, not about the consequences that will come later." The lawyer stood up. He was human too, one of the few who had been allowed to study galactic law. "Your Honor," he said, Captain followed her conscience. "Humans believe that all life has value. We cannot stand by and watch others suffer when we have the power to help." "And that belief makes you a threat to galactic order," said. "The people now worship humans as gods because of what Captain did. Their entire culture has changed. Their religion, their government, their way of life, all destroyed by one human's need to interfere." Felt anger rising in her chest. "They are alive," she said, her voice getting louder. "Their children will grow up and have children of their own. They will learn and grow and explore the stars. How is that destruction?" "Because it was not their path to choose," said a third judge. This one was covered in fur and had large, round eyes. "Every species must find its own way to survive. When others help them, they become weak. They stop trying to solve their own problems." The trial had been going on for 3 days, had heard the same arguments over and over. The galactic community believed that each species should develop on its own, without outside help. They said this kept the galaxy peaceful and stable, but had seen the children dying from the plague. She had watched parents hold their sick bobbies and cry because there was nothing they could do. The human medicine had been simple. Just a vaccine that Earth doctors had developed hundreds of years ago. It took 5 minutes to show the scientists how to make it. Within a week, no more children were dying. Within a month, the plague was completely gone. But the Galactic Council saw this as a crime. They said had robbed thee of their chance to develop the cure themselves. They said she had made them weak and dependent. Stood up from his tall chair. His silver robes fell around him like liquid metal. "This council has reached its decision. You are guilty of violating the prime directive of non-interference. Your actions have disrupted the natural order and threatened galactic stability." His heart sank, but she kept her face calm. She had known this moment was coming. "However," continued, "we recognize that humans are new to our community. You have been part of the galactic government for less than 50 years. Perhaps you did not fully understand the importance of our laws." His lawyer leaned forward. Maybe there was hope for a light punishment after all. Therefore, said, we will not execute you, as would normally happen for such a crime. Instead, you will be exiled to a world where you can do no more harm. The courtroom erupted in noise. Some aliens shouted in anger, upset that was not being killed. Others seemed relieved that the punishment was not worse. Raised his hand again. You will be taken to Prime. This world has been quarantined for 300 years. No ships may land there. No communications are allowed. You will spend the rest of your life alone on a dead world, thinking about what you have done. Felt the blood drain from her face. She knew about Prime. Every spacer in the galaxy had heard the stories. It had once been home to an advanced civilization called the... Then a terrible plague had killed everyone on the planet. The air was poison. The water was toxic. Plants and animals had all died out. Nothing could survive there. It was not just exile. It was a slow death sentence. The transport ship will leave tomorrow, said. You will have 1 hour to record any final messages for your family on Earth. Then you will be taken to Prime and forgotten. Closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she looked directly at. I regret nothing, she said. I would save those children again, even knowing this would happen. The silver-skinned judge stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away. Take her back to her cell. As the guards led out of the courtroom, she thought about the children she had saved. They would grow up now. They would have families and dreams and futures. Whatever happened to her on Prime, that would always be worth it. She was human, and humans never gave up hope. The escape pod hit the ground hard. His body was thrown against the safety straps as metal screamed and sparks flew around her. When everything finally stopped moving, she tasted blood in her mouth and felt pain in her left shoulder. But she was alive. She pressed the release button and the pod door hissed open. The first breath of Prime's air burned her lungs like fire. She quickly put on the breathing mask from her emergency kit, but she knew it would not last long. The mask had enough clean air for maybe 6 hours. Outside the pod, the world looked like a nightmare. The sky was a sick yellow color, and thick clouds moved overhead like oil on water. Strange plants grew everywhere, but they did not look like any plants had ever seen. Some had purple leaves that moved even when there was no wind. Others looked like trees, but their bark was black and seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. The air smelled wrong too. It was sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers mixed with dead fish. Every breath through her mask reminded that she was breathing poison. When the mask ran out of clean air, she would have to breathe the real atmosphere. She did not know if that would kill her right away or take days. Pulled her emergency supplies from the pod. She had a water recycler that could clean dirty water and make it safe to drink. She had food packets that would last for 2 weeks. She had a small medical kit, a basic tool set, and a portable shelter. The council had given her these things as a final act of mercy, but knew they expected her to die anyway. She set up the shelter between 2 of the black trees. The material was designed to keep out radiation and toxic air, but she could already see small holes appearing where the strange atmosphere touched it. Everything was breaking down faster than it should. The water recycler was having trouble too. When tried to clean water from a nearby stream, the machine made loud beeping sounds and flashed red lights. The water was not just dirty. It had things in it that the recycler did not know how to remove. She managed to get 1 cup of clean water before the machine gave up completely. That night lay in her shelter and listened to the sounds of Prime. Strange calls echoed in the distance. Things moved through the black trees, making the purple leaves rustle and shake. Once, something large walked near her shelter. She could hear its heavy footsteps and feel the ground shake, but it did not attack. It just moved past and disappeared into the darkness. Did not sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she thought about the breathing mask. Only 4 hours of clean air left. When morning came, the yellow sun looked weak and pale through the toxic clouds. Knew she had to make a choice. She could sit in her shelter and wait to die when her supplies ran out, or she could try to find a way to survive. She chose to survive. Had studied biology in school before joining the military. She knew that life was very good at adapting to difficult conditions. If this planet had been alive once, maybe there were still things living here that she could learn from. She started by studying the strange plants. The purple leaves that moved without wind. She watched them for an hour and realized they were filtering the air around them. They pulled in the toxic gases and pushed out something else, collected some of the gas that came from the leaves in a plastic bag. When she tested it, she found it was much cleaner than the normal air. It was still not safe for humans to breathe, but it was better. Next, she looked at the black trees. Their bark was not really pulsing like a heartbeat. It was pumping something up from the roots to the branches. Cut a small piece of bark and found clear liquid inside. She tested it with her medical scanner. The liquid was full of minerals and nutrients, but it also had toxins that would make her sick. But maybe she could filter those out. Spent the next 3 days working like she had never worked before. She used pieces from her broken pod to build a new air filter. Instead of trying to clean the toxic atmosphere directly, she collected the gas that came from the purple plants and filtered that. It took many tries, but finally she made air that she could breathe for short periods without her mask. For water, she found that the liquid from the black trees could be cleaned if she boiled it 3 times, and then passed it through cloth made from the fibers of dead plants. It tasted terrible, but it did not kill her. Food was harder. The emergency packets were running low and had not found anything on the planet that seemed safe to eat. But on her 5th day, she noticed that some of the strange animals that lived here ate certain berries that grew on low bushes. The berries were blue and covered in small spikes. Watch the animals carefully. They were about the size of cats but had 6 legs and skin like rubber. They ate the blueberries and did not seem to get sick, decided to try a very small piece of one berry. She felt sick for an hour, but then she felt better. The next day she tried a larger piece. Her stomach hurt, but she did not die. Slowly, carefully, taught her body to eat the food of Prime. The hardest part was the loneliness. Had always been around people. In the military, she lived with other soldiers. On her ship, she had a crew that depended on her. Now she was completely alone on a world that wanted to kill her. She talked to herself just to hear a human voice. She told stories about her childhood on Earth. She sang songs that her mother had taught her. At night, she looked up at the poisonous sky and imagined that somewhere out there, the children she had saved were growing up happy and healthy. By the end of her 1st week on Prime, had built a shelter that could protect her from the toxic air. She had a steady supply of water and food that would not kill her. She had tools made from pieces of her crashed pod and materials from the strange plants. Most importantly, she was still alive. Every morning woke up and chose to keep fighting. The council had sent her here to die, but she was human, and humans did not give up easily. She had survived the 1st week. Now she would survive the 2nd week and the 3rd and as many as it took. This dead world had not killed her yet. Maybe it never would. Stood at the edge of her small camp and looked out at the endless landscape of black trees and purple plants. Somewhere in this poisonous wilderness, there might be answers. There might be hope. She picked up her tools and started walking. If she was going to live on Prime, she needed to understand it better. And maybe, just maybe, she would find something that the council had missed. Something that would prove them wrong about everything. On her 7th day on Prime, heard something that should not have been possible. She was exploring the ruins of what looked like an old city when she heard it, someone singing. The voice was human, was sure of it. She had heard alien music during her time with the galactic community, and this was different. This was a song from Earth, an old melody that her grandmother used to hum while cooking dinner. Hands shook as she followed the sound through broken streets and collapsed buildings. The ruins were covered in the same strange plants that grew everywhere on Prime, but she could still see that this had once been a beautiful place. The buildings were made from smooth white stone that caught the light in interesting ways. Even broken and overgrown, they looked elegant and peaceful. The singing came from a large building at the center of the ruins. Approached carefully, her heart beating fast. She had thought she was the only living thing on this dead planet. If there was someone else here, who were they? How had they survived? She pushed through hanging vines and stepped into the building. Inside, the ceiling reached high above her head. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, and some of them still glowed with soft blue light. In the center of the room, a man sat cross-legged on the floor. He was human, with dark hair and Asian features. His clothes were made from plant fibers, and his skin was tanned from the pale yellow sun. The man looked up when entered. For a moment they both stared at each other in complete surprise. Then the man smiled. "Well," he said in English, "I was not expecting visitors." His voice came out as a whisper, "You're human." "Last time I checked, yes." The man stood up and brushed dust from his clothes. "My name is former with the Earth Research Division, though I suppose former is the right word since I've been missing for 15 years. 15 years. Could not believe what she was hearing. You've been here for 15 years. Nodded. My research ship was exploring this sector when we had engine problems. We crash-landed here and, well, the rest of my crew didn't make it through the first week. His expression became sad for a moment. The atmosphere killed them before they could adapt. But you survived. I'm stubborn that way, said with a small smile. Also, I had some advantages. So I understood how to study alien life forms, and I was carrying some experimental medical supplies that helped my body adjust to the toxins. Looked around the glowing chamber. This place, it's not abandoned, is it? Smile grew wider. Very good, you're right, they aren't dead, they're just different now. As if responding to his words, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter. Felt a strange sensation, like someone was gently touching her mind. It was not frightening, just curious. What's happening? She asked. They want to meet you, said. They have been waiting a long time for another human to arrive. His mind raced. The council said everyone here died from a plague 300 years ago. The council was wrong, replied. Well, partially wrong. There was a plague, but it wasn't natural. The Empire tried to conquer this world centuries ago. When they couldn't defeat through normal warfare, they used biological weapons. The glowing symbols pulsed, and heard something that was not quite a voice speaking in her mind. The words came slowly, like someone learning a new language. Welcome, daughter of Earth. We have waited long for your kind to return. Jumped backward but held up a calming hand. It's okay, he said. They communicate through the planet's biological network. All life here is connected, the plants, the animals, the atmosphere. They became part of that network to survive. They merged with the planet. In a way, yes. When the biological weapons attacked them, the only way to survive was to bond completely with their world's ecosystem. They gave up their physical bodies and became something new, something that the weapons couldn't destroy. Looked at the glowing walls with new understanding. The whole planet is alive. We are alive, the voice said in her mind. We are the trees and the air and the water. We are the song of life continuing. Walked to one of the walls and placed his hand on the glowing symbols. They've been waiting for someone who could help them communicate with the galaxy again. The other species are too rigid, too afraid of change. But humans adapt, finished. Exactly. We're not afraid to change, to become something new if we need to. They recognized this about humans even before the plague. They were hopping for contact with Earth when they attacked. The voice spoke again. Your people saved a dying world recently. We felt the joy of life preserved echoing across the stars. Realized they were talking about the species she had helped. How do you know about that? Life calls to life. When death is prevented, all living things feel the victory. Sat down on a stone bench that grew from the floor. What you did for they was exactly what the hoped humans would do. You proved that humans will risk everything to preserve life, even when others tell them not to interfere. The council exiled me for it. They sent me here to die. The council sent you here because they're afraid, said. They've built their whole society on the idea that species must develop in isolation. But they represent something different, a civilization that chose to merge with other life forms to survive and grow stronger. Walked closer to the wall. When she touched the symbols, she felt warmth spreading through her hand. The sensation was comforting, like being welcomed home after a long journey. We can share our knowledge with you, the voice said. We can show you how to live as part of the greater web of life, but the choice must be yours. What kind of choice? Asked. Answered, the can form a symbiotic bond with humans. It would let you survive here indefinitely, maybe even give you abilities you never dreamed of. But it would also change you. You wouldn't be entirely human anymore. Thought about this. She had already been changing since arriving on Prime. Her body was learning to process the toxic air and strange food. Her mind was adapting to the isolation and the alien environment. What happened to the other humans who came here before me? She asked. Looked confused. Other humans, you're the first person to arrive here since my crash. Stared at him. But the council made it sound like this was a common punishment. They called it exile to a dead world. Because they don't know what really happened here, said. They quarantined Prime based on reports from scouts. They never sent anyone to investigate for themselves. The implications hit like a physical blow. How many other dead worlds are there? How many other species that are actually still alive but changed? Many, the voice said sadly. Many worlds were attacked and forced to transform. Many civilizations learned to hide from those who would destroy them. Looked at with growing excitement. We could be ambassadors. We could help these hidden civilizations make contact with the galaxy again. Nodded. That's what I've been hopping for during all these years alone. But it would take more than one person to convince the council. It would take proof they couldn't ignore. Smiled for the first time since arriving on Prime. Then let's give them proof they can't ignore. The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter and felt something like approval flowing through the biological network. They were pleased with her decision. Are you ready to become something new, daughter of Earth? Took a deep breath of the toxic air that no longer seemed quite so poisonous. I'm ready. Felt the change begin as soon as she agreed to bond with the. It was not painful, just strange and wonderful. Warmth flowed through her body, starting from where her hand touched the glowing wall. Her vision became sharper, and she could suddenly see patterns of light connecting all the plants and trees around the ruined city. Watched her with kind eyes. The first connection is always amazing, he said. Don't fight it, let it happen naturally. Could feel her mind expanding, touching something vast and ancient. The consciousness was like an ocean of memories and knowledge that had been growing for thousands of years. She saw flashes of what Prime had been like before the attack, beautiful crystal cities floating above forests of silver trees, people who could speak directly to plants and animals, technology that worked with nature instead of against it. We will show you the truth, the collective voice said in her mind. You must understand what the galaxy has lost. The symbols on the walls began to move, forming new patterns that told a story. Watched as the history of the conquest played out in light and color. 300 years ago, the Empire had been expanding across the galaxy, conquering world after world. They used the same strategy everywhere, overwhelm the local population with superior technology, then force them to adopt culture and government. But they had been different. Their civilization was based on cooperation between all living things on their planet. Every plant, every animal, every microorganism worked together as part of a single, massive biological network. This made them incredibly difficult to conquer because defeating them required destroying all life on the planet. They had tried conventional warfare first, but how do you fight an enemy that can coordinate the actions of every living thing on their world? Trees would move to block ships. Animals would work together to sabotage equipment. Even the air itself seemed to turn against the invaders. Frustrated and losing badly, the military had created a biological weapon designed to break the connection between thee and their planet. They thought that if they could force the native people to become individuals instead of part of a collective, they could defeat them easily. The weapon had worked, but not the way they expected. Instead of breaking the biological network, it had forced every living to merge completely with the planet's ecosystem. They had given up their individual bodies to become part of something larger and more powerful than before. The transformation had been so complete that when scouts returned to check on their weapon, they found what looked like a dead world. The cities were empty. The technology had stopped working. There were no anywhere to be found. So they had declared victory and marked Prime as a plague world in their official records. They spread the story that a terrible disease had killed everyone, making sure that no one would ever want to come here and discover the truth. They rule the Galactic Council now, they explained too. They have convinced other species that their way is the only safe way. No interference, no cooperation between worlds, no sharing of knowledge that might change the balance of power. Understood now why her trial had been so predetermined. The Council was not really interested in justice. They were interested in maintaining the system that kept the Empire in control. "How many other worlds?" she asked out loud. Answered, "I've been researching that for years. They have helped me contact other transformed civilizations through the biological networks that exist on some planets. We've found at least 12 worlds that are officially dead, but actually house post-biological species." 12 worlds, repeated, amazed. 12 entire civilizations that the galaxy thinks are extinct. More are hidden, they added. Many species learn to hide their true nature after seeing what happened to worlds that revealed their abilities. Walked through the chamber, her new enhanced vision showing her details she had missed before. The symbols on the walls were not just decorations. They were living organisms that stored information and memories. The building itself was grown rather than built, shaped by the collective will of the over many years. She said, "What would happen if the galaxy knew the truth about all of this?" Smiled. "It would change everything. The Empire's power comes from fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of species becoming something other than what they started as. But if people knew that transformation could be a choice, a way to grow stronger instead of a thing to be afraid of, the Empire would fall," finished. "Not violently," said quickly. "The transformed species don't want war. They want cooperation. They want to share knowledge and help other civilizations grow, but that kind of cooperation would make the model of control impossible." Felt excitement building in her chest. Through the bond with she could sense that they felt it too. After 300 years of hiding, there was finally hope for change. "But we cannot do this alone," the collective voice warned. "One human bonded with one world is not enough to convince the galaxy. We need allies. We need proof that cannot be ignored." "What kind of proof?" asked. Walked to another wall and touched a different set of symbols. The room filled with soft light, and felt her awareness expand beyond the building, beyond the ruined city, beyond Prime itself. Suddenly she could sense other worlds, other transformed civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Each one was unique. Some had merged with their oceans, others with their atmospheres. Some had become part of vast fungal networks that connected multiple planets, but all of them were alive and all of them were waiting. "We need to bring representatives from these worlds to the Galactic Council," said. "We need to show them that transformation is not death, but evolution." could see the plan forming in her mind. But first we need to get off this planet, and according to the quarantine, no ships are allowed to land here. That restriction only applies to other species, the said with something that felt like amusement. But you are human, and humans are very good at finding ways around rules that don't make sense. Laughed. For the first time since her trial, she felt truly hopeful. You're right, humans are good at that. Looked at her curiously. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that the council sent me here expecting me to die, said. But what if instead of dying, I came back? What if I brought proof that their whole understanding of this world is wrong? The symbols on the walls pulsed brighter, and could feel the excitement of the entire planetary consciousness. We have been waiting so long for someone who could carry our message to the stars, the collective voice said. We are ready to trust humans with our greatest secret. Felt the bond between herself and the growing stronger. She was still human, but she was also something more now. She could feel the life force of every plant and animal on the planet. She could sense the vast intelligence that flowed through the biological networks. Most importantly, she could feel the hope of 12 hidden civilizations that had been waiting centuries for someone to help them step back into the light. She said, "How do you feel about taking a trip?" Grinned, "I've been stuck on this planet for 15 years. I thought I'd never see space again." Looked up at the glowing ceiling, already planning their next move. The council had tried to silence her by sending her to a dead world. Instead, they had given her the key to exposing the biggest lie in galactic history. It was time to go home, and this time she would not be going alone. 6 months after had been condemned to die on Prime, she walked back into the Galactic Council chambers. But she was not the same person who had been dragged away in chains. Her eyes now held flecks of green light that moved like living things. Her skin had a subtle glow that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. When she moved, it was with a grace that was both human and something more. Behind her walked, carrying a device that hummed with organic technology. But was not alone. Floating beside her was a projection of shifting light that represented the collective consciousness of Prime. And behind them came 3 more figures that made the assembled aliens gasp in shock and fear. The first was a being that looked like living water held in a roughly human shape. It represented Prime, a world that had been marked as dead by toxic oceans for 200 years. The second appeared to be made of crystal and light, speaking for the luminous collective of Prism VII. The third looked like a walking forest, with bark for skin and leaves that changed color as it moved. Judge stood up from his silver throne, his black eyes wide with confusion and fear. "This is impossible," he said. "Is dead. Prime is a quarantined world. How are you here?" Smiled, and her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate from the air itself. "I am very much alive, Your Honor, and I bring greetings from civilizations that you declared extinct." The courtroom erupted in chaos. Aliens shouted in dozens of languages. Some demanded explanations. Others called for security. A few seemed terrified and tried to leave the chamber. Raised his hand for silence, but his voice shook when he spoke. "If you are truly, prove it. Submit to genetic scanning." "Of course," said. She walked to the scanning device in the center of the room and placed her hand on the reader. The machine beeped and displayed her genetic profile on the large screen above the chamber. It was definitely her, but the readout showed additional data that made no sense to most of the watching aliens. "The scan confirms your identity," said slowly, "but it also shows biological modifications that should not be possible. What has happened to you?" "I learned the truth about the worlds you call dead," replied. "I learned that the Empire has been lying to this council for centuries." A representative jumped to his feet. "These are dangerous accusations. This human has clearly been infected by some alien parasite. She should be quarantined immediately." Turned to face and her green-flecked eyes seemed to see right through him. "Are you afraid of what I might reveal?" Counselor K, afraid that the galaxy will learn what your empire really did to these worlds. The projection of Prime pulsed with light, and suddenly every screen in the chamber activated. Historical records began playing real footage from the conquest attempts, showing biological weapons being deployed against peaceful civilizations. The water being from Prime spoke in a voice like ocean waves. My people did not die from toxic contamination. We merged with our world's oceans to survive chemical weapons. The crystal entity's voice rang like musical chimes. The luminous collective chose transformation over extinction when the Empire tried to harvest our energy-based life forms. The forest being's words rustled like wind through leaves. We became one with our planet's ecosystem to protect ourselves from those who would strip our world bare for resources. As each transformed representative spoke, more evidence appeared on the screens. The pattern was clear and damning. World after world had been attacked by the Empire, and when conventional conquest failed, they had used weapons designed to force entire species to choose between death and radical transformation. Judge looked around the chamber with growing alarm. Many of the non-council members were staring at the evidence with shock and anger. The careful order that had ruled galactic society for centuries was cracking. Even if this is true, said desperately, it changes nothing. The prime directive of non-interference exists to prevent chaos. These transformed beings prove why such restrictions are necessary. Stepped forward, and her voice carried the authority of someone who had touched the consciousness of an entire planet. The prime directive exists to maintain power. It prevents species from cooperating, from sharing knowledge, from growing beyond what they started as. But humans represent something different. Activated the device he carried, and the chamber filled with the warm harmonics of the communication network. Suddenly, every alien in the room could feel what felt the vast web of life that connected not just Prime, but dozens of transformed worlds across the galaxy. This is what cooperation looks like, said. This is what species can become when they choose to grow together instead of fighting alone. The counselor was backing toward the exit now, his silver face twisted with panic. This is contamination, mental influence. The human has been compromised. The human has been enlightened, said a new voice from the entrance. Admiral Sarah's former commanding officer walked into the chamber followed by a dozen other Earth military officers. And Earth stands behind her completely. Stared at the newcomers. How did Earth vessels reach this system? This session was classified. Admiral smiled grimly. Did you really think we wouldn't notice when one of our best officers disappeared? We've been monitoring this trial from the beginning. And when Captain's life signs reappeared in the Galactic Communication Network 6 days ago, we came to investigate. Looked at her former commander with gratitude. She had hoped Earth would support her, but she had not been sure. The transformation she had might have frightened her own species. What does Earth want? Asked. Admiral walked to stand beside. Earth proposes the formation of a new galactic organization, the Cooperative Development Alliance. Our goal will be to help species grow and learn from each other, instead of keeping them isolated and afraid. And if the Council refuses? Asked a representative from the Crystalline Collective, one of the few non-species that had supported its original conviction. Smile was radiant. Then we'll form it anyway. 12 transformed civilizations have already agreed to join. 7 other species have expressed interest. And humanity will serve as ambassadors between biological and post-biological life forms. The transformed representatives stepped forward together and felt their combined presence wash over the chamber like a tide of possibility. For the first time in centuries, the hidden civilizations of the galaxy were ready to reveal themselves. The age of isolation is ending, announced. Species will choose their own paths forward, with help from those who have walked similar roads, and humans will be there to help build bridges between what was and what could be. Judge looked around the chamber and saw that the balance of power had already shifted. The smaller species that had been dominated by the Empire for so long were looking at its alliance with hope and excitement. He slumped in his throne, defeated. "What do you want from this council?" "Recognition," said simply. "Recognition that the worlds you quarantined are not dead. Recognition that transformation is not destruction. And recognition that the galaxy is big enough for many different ways of life to coexist." 6 months ago, had stood in the same chamber as a condemned criminal. Today, she stood as the ambassador of a new age. The woman who had been sent to die on a forbidden world had instead found the key to freeing an entire galaxy from fear. As she left the chamber, surrounded by representatives from dozens of species both old and new, thought about the children she had saved so long ago. They would grow up in a galaxy where cooperation was possible again, where species could choose their own destinies without fear. That alone made everything she had endured worthwhile. But as boarded the Earth vessel that would take her to her next assignment establishing contact with the hidden civilization of Umbra, she knew this was just the beginning. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars. They would be the bridge builders, the ambassadors of possibility, the species that helped others reach for something greater than they had ever imagined. And it had all started with one human's refusal to let innocent people die, even when the whole galaxy told her it was wrong. Smiled as the ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying her toward new worlds and new wonders. Being human had never felt so important.